Alright guys, you saw the title from this video. In this video, in chess, I'm going to be explaining how to go from 100 to 500 elo. And yeah, let's just begin. And in this video, we're going to be explaining 11 important topics, like how you can go from 100 to 500 elo, as recently a lot of people have been trying to enter the game of chess. So yeah, I mean, we may as well just explain how. But before I begin, guys, if you enjoy, so please drop a like and subs. I would really help the channel ton. If you really enjoy, so you can also drop a super thanks. By the way, if it's difficult to hear my voice, just turn on captions. And if you have any questions, just comment them down below. And by the way, I'm actually rated 1200 elo. This is just a really old game of mine that I decided to choose. And yeah, let's just begin with our first topic: understanding how pieces move and their values. Let's just begin. The pawn, on its first move, can go 2 squares. Both sides, pretty much. And yeah, afterwards, like, let's say this happens, they can only move 1 square, pretty much. Now, another thing, the pawn can only capture diagonally. Like, let's say I do this and this, it can capture diagonally. Like, it can take, pretty much. But now, let's just ignore this. Now that you understand the pawn, its value is 1 point of material. Now let's move on to another piece. The knight. The knight is the only piece in chess that can jump over other pieces, which makes it unique. So it also moves in an L shape. Like, for example, let's go over here. The knight can go realistically by, here, 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 and here. However, 3 of the squares are blocked, so we can't go over there, because you can't capture your own pieces. So yeah, we'll just move around randomly, pretty much. And yeah, it also captures in an L shape. All pieces capture in the way they move. I think it's pretty obvious, but okay, I'll just mention that. The knight is worth about 3 points. Now we have the bishop. First of all, you usually just need to push the pawns to, like, use them, pretty much. Now, you have 2 types of bishops when you start off the game. The light squared bishop and the dark squared bishop. The light squared bishop can only go on light squares, and dark squared bishop can only go on dark squares. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, but okay. And yeah, they move diagonally, pretty much. And also, they capture diagonally. And their value is about 3 points. Although there is a lot of debate in the chess community as to which piece is better, the knight or the bishop. Personally, I prefer the knight, although in the bishop there are more positions in which you can use it. However, the knight, you can jump over other pieces, and you aren't just trapped to just one specific square type. So yeah, that's why I prefer the knight over the bishop, but it's okay. You can pick whichever one you want. Now we have the rook. Now, the rook is a piece that can move vertically and horizontally, like this. Now, usually this is not the best way to activate your rook at all in the game, but we're just going to do this way, as this is the fastest way. Like, for example, we can go over here, we can go over here, we can even do this if we want, although that just loses the rook instantly. Or we can go here. But yeah, I think you get how the rook moves now. And now, finally, the second last piece we are going to talk about, the queen. The queen is just an amazing piece, to be honest. Like, the queen can move diagonally. Well, whoops. Oh. Diagonally, vertically, and horizontally. Yeah, or in other words, this piece is just very powerful, and the queen's value is about 9 points. And let me just do something really quickly. Like, let me just show all of you how powerful this piece really is. Like, see? Yeah, a lot of spaces you can move to. And now let's talk about the final piece. The king. The king doesn't really have a defined value in chess, because if you lose the king, you instantly lose the game. But the king can only capture about 1 square. Like, pretty much. Like, let's say we go over here. Like, yeah, the king can only move about 1 square. Let's just do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Yeah, I think you get the point, pretty much. The king only moves 1 square in any direction. Kind of like the queen. So now that, hopefully, you understand how the pieces move and their values, let's go to the next point. Basic piece coordination. let's say you're playing a game like this, where you want to launch an attack on this pawn. Now, obviously, if you were to just do something like, let's say, this, you'd instantly lose your rook for nothing, because, well, there's a defender, and in chess you have to count. How many attackers do you have? 1. How many defenders do they have? 1. You need to have at least one more attacker than your opponent does in terms of defenders for the attack to not completely fail. So, if I did want to attack this pawn, for example, what I would need first is the support of another piece. So, let's do, for example, this. Now, obviously, in this position, you should not be playing like this. But yeah, this is just an example. Now, you can go over here. And I know, obviously, this is completely losing because of this move. Well, no, apparently that isn't losing. Oh, wow, okay. To be honest, I have no idea what's the losing move here, but okay. And, yeah. Now, let's say your opponent does something like this. You can capture here. And it's a trade, and you've won a pawn. Yeah, like, that's how it works, pretty much. And, yeah, that's pretty much how basic piece coordination works. And we will talk about basic piece coordination later on, like, in a way that actually makes sense, in the next rule. Now, we are going to understand how to deal with the early queen attack, aka the wayward queen attack. The wayward queen attack is the most common opening that you'll face in chess. It's the most common opening. Your opponent just brings out their queen instantly. That's literally how it works. Like, your opponent will do this. You'll do something like this. Well, no, not something like this. You'll do something like this, maybe. And you just lose your pawn for nothing. However, what can always happen is this. Your opponent will prepare an attack on the f7 square. And this is known as a scholar's mate. And it's literally the most common attempted checkmate in the game. And if you do something like this, you instantly lose the game. So, the way to deal with an attack like this is quite simple. Let's say your opponent goes over here. Now this pawn is in danger. You will develop your knight, therefore protecting the pawn. Now let's say your opponent also decides to develop their bishop. Now this pawn, don't be scared. It's completely fine. All you have to do is play this. Now the reason you can't play g6 immediately is because if you were to do that, you'd lose your rook instantly. So you can't play it immediately. Instead, you have to wait, and then you can play it. And the reason they can't capture now is because the knight defends. Now, usually the most common move in this position is f3. And now don't just push a random piece because you'll lose the game. The reason your opponent will go to f3 is because they still want to do this attack. What you should do instead is play knight f6, therefore blocking the attack, and they can't really do anything. Now your opponent will probably play something like d3. And now your opponent is in a really bad position. You can develop your knight over here, and this pawn makes it an outpost. And your opponent might do something like queen e3, and they'll instantly lose the game. Because the king is attacked, the queen is attacked, and the rook is attacked. And which piece should you capture after this move? The queen, because the queen is worth 9 points. So yeah, that's how you can deal easily with a quick queen attack. And that actually leads to our next part of the video about how to create your own queen attack, which is literally just what I showed. So basically, let me just explain it again, like if you want to understand how to create your own queen attack. What happens after these two moves, e5 and e4, you develop your queen over here, the wayward queen attack, and if your opponent does something like this, you just win a free pawn. And you're automatically winning. If your opponent does something like this, you win a rook. And if your opponent does something like this, you should probably just abort the plan entirely, because playing this move afterwards, your opponent probably knows what to do. I mean, it's not a bad idea to play this move, but what you should 100% do is not to go to f3, like, unless you want to take a risk. Because going to f3, it will just lead to this exact position in which you will be under serious threat, and yeah, you will have developed absolutely nothing while your opponent has developed 2 knights, and yeah, they're just in a better position overall. Now let's go to our next segment. Understand king safety. Now the king is the most important piece in the game. Although, to be honest, if you were to give it a value, it's like maybe like 4 points. The reason it's the most important is because it's literally like what makes the game continue. If you lose the king, the game instantly ends. So let's say we have a normal game, okay? Like nothing too crazy, just something like this. And then both sides castle. Let's say something like this happens, although obviously that wouldn't happen realistically. Now let's say something like this happens. Now let's say your opponent does this. Let's say you do this. Now you do this. Well, no, your opponent. Now say you do this. If your opponent does this, you should always be worried for threats to your king, because this pawn is in danger. And if this rook wasn't here, like let's say we just played something like this, we'd still be losing by a lot. However, if you don't move the rook and the rook is here, you'll instantly lose the game. And yeah, this is what's important, understanding king threats, especially if you've castled. Now, what you should always do to try to avoid king threats is just castle. Generally, that's what you should do. And just make sure that your position cannot be destroyed. And by the way, sometimes your opponent will try to checkmate you with a rook at like the end game. So just make sure that doesn't happen. You can just push a pawn or just keep a rook at this file. Just make sure that doesn't happen. And yeah, that's pretty much how you just deal with king safety overall. And always make sure that your king is not in a dangerous position, like not just out in the open unless it's the end game. And do not, and I mean do not, try to open the position if your king is in the center. It's not a good idea. You will 9 times out of 10 lose if you do this. Anyways, let's go to our next level. Creating danger levels. Now, danger levels are important. Because let's say, for example, let's say you do this. Okay, let's say your opponent does this. They push their pawn, attacking your bishop. And let's just say we already had a pawn over here. Okay, but let's just say like this. Now, what you can do in this position is, instead of moving the bishop, you can push a pawn, attacking their bishop. So if they capture your bishop, you can capture their bishop. That's the idea, pretty much. And this doesn't just go with the bishop, for example. Like, for example, let's just do this. Well, no, let's just go back to, like, the normal position, pretty much. Okay. Let's just say, for example, like this. Wait for it. Okay. So let's say that your opponent has decided to attack your bishop, like in this position. Now, the thing is, because you have this type of position, you can push your pawn. Now, what is more value? A queen or a bishop? The queen has more value, so if your opponent captures your bishop, they just lose their queen for nothing, pretty much. So yeah, you can launch this attack because you know they will have to move their queen, and you never know, maybe this bishop will actually be able to be used for something important. And yeah, let's just continue. That's pretty much how danger levels work. You just attack a piece with equal or higher value so that if your opponent captures, you can also capture back immediately. Now, you should also know how to strategically utilize checks. Like, let's say, for example, our king... he's just out in the open. What we can do is we can play something like this, then this. They can just launch an attack immediately. And let me give you an idea. Okay, wait for it. Let's just do this. Let's just say our opponent does this. Let's do this. Let's just say our opponent does this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Okay. So, oh, whoops. I just need to make sure this can't actually lead to a checkmate. Because if it does, that would kind of ruin the whole point of this. Okay. So now, what you can do in this position is pretty much just win the queen, and actually the game in this position. With the move, bishop to e6. Now, let's just say, for example, that this pawn just didn't exist, okay? Now, what would have happened after this move is that the king would have gone over here, and your opponent would have lost their queen immediately. That's how it works, pretty much. And yeah, this isn't the only way you can win a piece of material. For example, you can also pin a piece of material. Like, let me just show you that. For example, like, let's say we have this, and this, and let's just say we have like this, for example. Let's say your opponent does this. You can prepare something like this, and let's say this pawn can't really defend anymore. And let's say this happens, and let's say this knight just moves over here. The winning move is bishop to b4, because the queen is pinned to the king, because, well, by the rules of chess, the king can't be captured, otherwise you lose the game, so the queen can't move. The queen only has one choice: capture the bishop. And yeah, that's pretty much how it works. Now, let's go to the next rule. Don't stalemate. Stalemate is the situation in which your opponent literally has no legal moves, and yeah, like, you just end up not checkmating them. Like, let me just develop this position really quickly, because yeah, it's not going to be easy to develop this. So yeah, you might want to skip this part if I'm being completely honest. Like, just give me a moment, pretty much. Oh, right. Just let me do... Wait, does that work? No. Okay, wait for it. Trust me, I will finish. Really soon, eventually. Okay. Okay, now obviously this is not a real game, and this will never happen, realistically. But let's say, for example, now your opponent... Well, no, you're playing with the white pieces, and your opponent has nothing left, okay? And obviously you're not going to have this much material, realistically. But let's just say now you want to checkmate your opponent. What you have to do is make sure that you do not stalemate. Or a stalemate in which your opponent is not in check, but they don't have any legal moves. Therefore, the game will go on infinitely. That's the rules of chess, pretty much. Now let's say this happens, now let's say this happens, now let's say this happens, now this check happens, and this happens. Now let's say this happens, the king goes over here, now the queen goes over here, now the king goes over here. The move, queen f7, is stalemate, as we can see, because black has no legal moves. There are no moves that they can make without going into a check in which they will be captured. So the game ends in a draw, as you can see. The game is just forced to end in a draw. So to make sure that this does not happen, what you need to do before making a move in a situation like this is, what move can I play that won't lead to a stalemate? You need to make sure that your opponent always has a legal move when you're about to launch a checkmate attack, if it's not just consistently checks. What can you do, for example? You can play queen here, queen here, queen here, even rook here, and that'll be checkmate. However, do not play something like queen f7 and believe they're just getting closer to the king, because all of a sudden the game is stalemate. Your opponent simply doesn't have a move. That's how it works. You need to think before playing a move, like, especially in a position like this. Now obviously this is a very easy position, but sometimes it will be a lot more complex. And at the early levels of chess, I remember that when I was like below 500 elo, like half of the games that I played that ended in a draw, it ended in a draw by stalemate. And actually not like 50%, it was like 90% that ended by stalemate. I don't think I even had like one game that ended in a draw by agreement or threefold repetition. The only time I've ever had a draw below 500 elo, at least like 90% of the time, is because of my opponent accidentally stalemating because they didn't spend enough time to think, like, what will lead to stalemate, and sometimes they weren't even aware that stalemate was a rule. So yeah, I'm just telling you right now, always be aware that stalemate is a possibility. Anyways, next thing, you need to understand each phase of the game. What do I mean by this? Each part of the game. Like, for example, this is the opening. When the game just starts, for example. Now I'm just going to play a normal opening instead. And, yeah, this is pretty much just how it goes, usually. Like, yeah, that's the opening pretty much. Just, like, the first 10 moves that are normal. The middle game, when everyone starts to develop their pieces. Pretty much. That's how it works. Yeah, this is pretty much just the middle game. And now, let's say that all of a sudden everyone is starting to, like, just trade off their pieces, you know, the usual. Like, you know, like this. Now, let's just say that this rook and this bishop, like both of these, like, okay, obviously this position is not going to work, but this is just to give you an idea, pretty much. Like, let's say there's nothing really left besides just the kings and the pawns. This is the end game in which you are going to use your king because now it's completely safe. And yeah, you're just going to try to promote your pawn. And in this position, it's not really able for either side to win. Well, no, now apparently is. Yeah, I know, and like, yeah, this is just how it goes. And yeah, black is actually completely winning because they can play this. And yeah. Now the goal is to just promote your pawn, pretty much. Like, let's just say that black manages to promote their pawn by doing this. All you have to do is just make sure your opponent's king cannot get to the promotion square. So for example, play this. If they play this, make sure you can play this. Now they have to go up, you can play this. Now they have to go over here, you can play this. And they have to go over here, you can promote. Between a queen, a knight, a rook, and a bishop. And now in the below 500 elo like stage of the game, usually just promote to a queen, because probably you're not going to stalemate, although if you are going to stalemate 100%, just promote to a rook. And promotion to a knight or a bishop is usually just for grandmasters, and I don't think I've even once promoted to a knight or a bishop. So, yeah, that's generally just what you're supposed to do. And now, one more thing. En passant. En passant is a move in which, if your pawn advances like a lot, like 2 squares immediately past your opponent, yeah, they can just capture you immediately. Like, let's say your opponent does this. En passant is a move in which you can capture diagonally, like this. And 90% of chess.com's glitch reports below 1000 elo are about en passant. It became so problematic they had to write on the glitch reports that en passant is not a glitch. And they literally inform you about the move. You can just hover over like an info button while you're playing a game. So yeah, that's just a little bit of a bonus. And yeah, these are just a bunch of tips and tricks to try to go from 100 to 500 elo. And yeah, this is the whole video. If you enjoyed this, please drop a like and subs. I would really help the channel a ton. If you really enjoyed this, you can also drop super thanks. If you have any questions, just comment them down below. And comment down below how helpful this video was. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye. See you in the next video.